And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And this podcast, we're going to talk about the law of demand. So this is one of the most important concepts in economics. And we're going to draw, when we do this law of demand, we're going to draw the distinction between moving along the demand curve, which happens when there's a change in price, which we call a change in the quantity demanded. We're going to distinguish that from shifting a demand curve, and that happens when something other than the price changes, and that causes a change in demand. That causes a change in demand. So that allows us to define the law of demand. So what's the law of demand say? Well, the law of demand says that whenever there's an increase in the price of a good, that there will be a decrease in the quantity, and whenever there's a decrease in the price of a good, there will be an increase in the quantity, comma, ceteris paribus. So let me say that in everyday language. In everyday language, that means if the price of a good goes up, people buy less. If the price of a good goes down, people buy more. Everything else held equal. Everything else held equal. So this concept right here, let's start with the beginning of this. If everything else is held equal, when the price of a good goes up, people buy less, and when the price of a good goes down, people buy more. That concept is connected with these statements here and this graph. That is to say this. When a price changes, in our example, the price went up and we moved along the curve right here. When you get an increase in the price, people buy less of the good. And that's called a change in quantity demanded. Okay, so increased price, quantity goes down, decreased price, quantity goes up. That's moving along the curve. The curve does not move. That's a change in quantity demanded. So the first part of the law of demand is moving along the demand curve, quantity demanded. The second part of the law of demand is ceteris paribus. And ceteris paribus here means everything else held constant. So in order to be able to move along a demand curve, we have to assume that everything else is held constant, that nothing else in the world is changing except for the price of the good. Okay, so people's incomes aren't changing. Um, you know, whether or not the good that they're buying, like apple juice, for example, whether it's good for them or bad for them, that doesn't change. Whether the price of orange juice changes, that doesn't change. Everything else in the world doesn't change. Everything else is held constant, except for the price of the good. That's it. Okay, so like we're trying to mimic what science might look like here. We're only changing one variable. When the price of a good changes, it changes the quantity, and we move along the curve. That's it. However, what happens if something else does change? So my example that I talked about in the last video was, what if a new study comes out that says that drinking apple juice causes cancer? Carcinogens are in apple juice. So if that's true, then that's going to change the ceteris paribus. Everything else no longer will be held constant. So that is connected with this graph and these statements over here. If something other than the price changes, this new risky information connected with drinking apple juice, that causes the entire graph to shift. That causes the whole demand curve to shift into the left. And that is called a change in demand. So the second part of the law of demand is the shifting of the demand curve. So I think about this way: the first part of the law of demand is the change in the quantity demanded. That's the moving along the curve. That's all. Sorry, that's all this stuff over here. That's all this stuff, and then the second part of the law of demand, the ceteris paribus, that's the change in demand, and that's this over here. That's moving along the curve. That's moving along the curve. So this is the law of demand. The higher the price of good, the lower the quantity. The lower the price, the higher the quantity, comma, ceteris paribus, which is captured in these two graphs. Hope that helps understand the distinction between quantity demanded and demand. And on some upcoming videos, we will do some examples of moving along the curve and shifting the curve. This has been another podcast with Mr. Hagan, and we will see you on the next Econ podcast.